Right, okay, I think we are at past. Can you all hear me? Because it's funny, I'm not sort of hearing if I'm projecting. Yeah, great, thank you. Hello, thank you for coming and welcome to the Radical Housing Conference Scotland Part 3. So I'm Gail Halverson. I run SEDA Land, which is the part of the Scottish Ecological Design Association that looks at rural issues in a cross-sectoral way. And my colleague Craig White, who's there doing the social media at the moment, is from Agile Homes. And Craig set up the Radical Housing Conference in England a few years ago, and this is his first venture north of the border. And for some reason, we decided to expand what was a one-day event to 3, God knows why, and we'll live to regret it. But anyway, we're near the end now. The first 2 were whole-day events with the main purpose of working out how we might get more affordable homes built in Scotland made out of local timber. So we've had foresters, timber scientists, policymakers, construction companies, a whole range of the whole chain, the value chain to make timber buildings at those events. But we did also look at different types of housing, and we did have a session where we looked at cooperative housing and co-housing. And so this event for the Fringe, we wanted to do something just a bit more stepping back and looking a bit more trying to step back from the actual material built environment that architects generally look at. And because the theme is reciprocity, what better than intergenerational living, which is something that's just not done in Scotland or the UK enough. And I certainly, from a personal perspective, I feel very passionately about that. And I've always been quite evangelical about intergenerational living because I was brought up in a large house with my siblings, my parents, and my grandparents. And for me, that was an incredibly valuable and enriching life. It was normal for me as a child. That's what life is about, so I didn't think it was very different. But now I discover that actually that is unusual. But it was wonderful because I had a grandfather that I would spend a lot of time outside with who taught me to recognize birdsong. Inside, he'd be playing with my brothers, war games in Latin. You had to speak Latin when you played war games with him. But I also had a grandmother who was disabled. She had Parkinson's. And again, it was very normal. Living in close proximity with someone with a disability, to me, was life. And I've realized now that that gave us all an ability to care, to have empathy, which is very valuable. And I think it means that we didn't have a fear of disability as well. And I think that's quite interesting. I think a lot of young people who don't live in close proximity to older people, that it's just the unknown. And so there's a fear there. So they don't know how to react to these people. So that's my very personal experience. We're going to hear all the pros and cons now from our fantastic panel, Robin, Savannah, Sehrish and Julia, who is online. You can't see her yet, but she's online because she's in the Isle of Lismore. I'll introduce them properly later. The format of the day is, as all SEDA Land events, it's a short presentation from each of the panelists, and then we're going to open up. Normally I do a bit of Q&A-ing, but I think we'll just open straight up. And if you haven't got any, great, then I can hog the questions. We haven't got a remote audience because I thought this, again, more in the spirit of the Fringe. So it's just you, so get the questions ready. Now to kick off, Sophie, again, in true SEDA Land fashion, we integrate artists with everything we do. It's a really important part of SEDA Land, so we always have artists designing our posters, and I'm delighted to say that Sophie Cooke, who is a regular contributor to SEDA Land, is going to read the first. This poem was commissioned for this, and I will let Sophie introduce it herself.
Thanks, Gail. Before I do, also in the spirit of reciprocity, I'm on the steering group with SEDA Land, and we thought it would be a really nice idea if any of you feel inspired and want to also write a poem on anything that comes up this evening, please do, and send it in to us, and we'd hopefully put a couple up on the website. So if you would like to also write a poem, please feel free. So here's mine, A Shared Life. The sharing is the grain of small movement. Nothing major, not the kind of thing you clean the house for. It's warmth inside the walls, the caring for your smallest change of heart, the doubt, the fear, the sudden joy like swallows flitting into nest. A coat hangs by another. We are ready to walk out in the same year. And you have walked so many others. You know the snow and where to look for treasure. We go to buy eggs, or sit with hot mugs in our hands in the glow of the kitchen on days dark with rain beyond the glass. So much has fallen away by now, but there is still the sense of your life and all the love you've held in it, the stories that have shaped your heart, the rubbing of the grains of sand. The stairwell's air is like a shell, a spiral whelk of light in shade that drifts and lands. We are the space between us as much as the places we can touch. Thanks.
Thank you, Sophie. I always feel you need a few moments to take in these beautiful words. Thank you. So now we'll have the first of our provocations, as I always call them, and that's going to be from Savannah, please. Savannah is, I know that you're a Churchill Fellow who's just travelled around the world, but I can never remember the name of your organisation, because it's one of these ones that's a rather generic. There you are. It's one of these horribly bland titles. But with Savannah specialises in looking at health issues within that. And yes, over to you, Savannah.
Thank you. Yeah, this is loud, isn't it? Too loud, maybe? No, okay. Yeah, thank you so much for having me at the Scottish Radical Housing Conference. I recently went to the US and Australia on a trip, and I visited 54 intergenerational communal housing models. My background is health policy and community-led innovation, so I come at it a bit from that lens. And I was just here before at the Co-Housing Scotland AGM, where I was giving a talk, and there I did a little bit more of the kind of detail, and here I'm going to try and step back a little bit. But if you are interested, in July I'm publishing an output, and it's very detailed, and there's a lot in there. So I'm going to try and step back from that today, and give you a little bit of a flavour of what I heard. How am I doing slides? Do I say next slide, please? Next slide, please. Thank you. So I just want to start with a quote. At an amazing, urban, affordable co-housing community, which is also a cooperative, one of the residents said to me, "Life past 60 can be tough, cut off from your livelihood and community. Living alone can be horrifying, but not here. I got a new lease of life when I thought I was heading into isolation." Next slide, please. At the core, the communities I visited they vary in structure, they vary in size, from 6 people to 300, they vary in location, but they're all about creating housing, which is not just physical infrastructure, it's social infrastructure. And that's what I'm interested in. And we were talking earlier, I'm not authoritarian about, this counts, this doesn't count. I think it's a spectrum, and it's really important that we recognize that and the power that housing has to bring us together or keep us apart. None of the communities I visited are assisted living facilities. They're diverse communal spaces where people care about each other, not for each other. And I'm not saying that any of this is a replacement of health or care. What I'm saying is that when we have this layer of people who care about us, it does preventative health work on its own. Next slide, please. So much of Western society, particularly here in the UK, is facing a crisis of disconnection. There's, not to bring everyone down because we're going to get higher, but there's There's chronic loneliness, escalating mental health crises, as we know, housing crises, and generational division. You were just talking about how you grew up in this multi-generational household. I definitely did not, and I can definitely say that most of the people that I know don't interact, and my age group don't interact with anyone who's not in their generation outside of family. So we've designed services, programs, even housing, often in an age-segregated way. And I think that this is leading to huge missed opportunities. If we go on to the next slide, I'm just going to show, these are 3 examples of recent headlines. So generational division is not helped by the media. Some of the things are silly, like this idea that millennials killed mayonnaise, which, as far as I'm seeing, is actually thriving as a condiment. But some of them are actually pretty dark, like calling a whole generation sociopaths or lazy. And none of these, you won't have seen before. So if we go on to the next slide, my question is, what happened if we designed our homes and our neighborhoods to intentionally tackle division, to encourage instead of disincentivize connection beyond our nuclear family? My research focused on intergenerational communal housing models. So people live together, they have their private space, but they share a lot too. The 54 included a really diverse range of examples that I'm not going to talk about today, but I'm happy to share if you want to ask me more details. But basically, one of the things I was looking at was what are the benefits, and the benefits are so broad for a broad range of ages. And obviously there's, health, well-being, social stimulation, connection, social connection, all of these things, but it's actually broader than that as well. There's things like sharing the load when it comes to childcare, chores, environmental stewardship, sharing resources, providing a base for people who don't live in the community, but who live broader. When we're all losing so much of this community provision, these spaces often provide that. And then kind of generic, but it sounds generic, but it's super, super important, cultural enrichment across backgrounds, across ages, fostering kind of empathy through being in proximity to, like you were saying, people who are different from yourselves. Next slide, please. One resident said to me, as a single dad, it's great to know someone's always around. If I get home late from work, there's always people here. It's like my daughter has lots of aunts and uncles. Everyone knows where my key is. This is probably in stark contrast to the experience of most single parents in urban environments, which is what he was. Next slide, please. So people in this room, you might be, you're here, so you might be different than most people, but I would ask, when is the last time that you stopped to chat with a neighbour, offered or got some DIY help from a neighbour, borrowed something from a neighbour? Maybe you guys have, maybe you've fostered bonds along your street. I know as a London renter that I don't really see that anywhere. I think that we've kind of lost the art of neighbouring. I think it's a pretty priceless social currency that is often invisible, but is the bedrock of a lot of our of a healthy society. So I've started to use this word neighbourisms, which essentially are these small informal acts of care and connection, which at all 54 communities I visited, they're not the exception, they're the norm, they just happen all the time. So these places are managing to build a culture where people naturally are doing neighbourisms all the time, which is very different from the outside world. So almost done, I promise. Next slide, please. This is just another quote. This community has been a lifeline. If someone hasn't experienced living life like this, they've missed out. So what I have been asking myself is, why do we continue to design a society that segregates us by age when evidence shows the immense value of intergenerational connection? But it's not just that. It's every time we design in an age-segregated way, we are designing in a short-term way, because age is something that's very different from other things that make us different from each other, in that unless we die, we're all going to travel through every single age group. So my other question is, why do we continue to push this narrative of isolated nuclear family home ownership as being the only version of success or the only valid way of living, especially when we consider the context of a housing crisis, of the climate emergency, and of more single parents than ever? So intergenerational communal living, it's not a utopian fantasy. It's being lived, it's being developed, and it's being learned from in countries around the world, and it's being used to tackle social challenges, and it is, as one resident called it, a lifeline. Next slide, please. So I'll just end there, and just to say I'm really keen to be in touch with everyone. Thinkitforward.net, which is my website. I'll be sharing my output. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Savannah. Really interesting expression, design a society, because we will move on as architects to whether we can design buildings to promote it, but you're talking about designing society. So that's something definitely we'll have to discuss in the Q&A afterwards, you know, because I sort of think cultures are very difficult to change. It's easier to change buildings. Can buildings lead? So one for later. Robin. So Robin is an architect from Fraser Livingston. He's the founder and co-director of that architectural practice that specializes in more alternative housing models. Robin.
Hi. Thank you for the invite to contribute. I'm just checking this works. I might have to just shout if you to change slides. So, yeah, next slide. So this is us. We're based just over in the Meadows, up in Marchmont in an old converted dairy shop. Next slide, please. We have experience in all broad ranges of house types, from affordable homes to private for sale to one-off houses, and across new build projects and adaptive reuse projects. Next slide, please. A quick autobiography. So these are photographs from my parents' childhood. I didn't put one in from my own for obvious reasons, but I was born and raised in Dunfermline in a council housing culture on both sides of the family. So a product of the two post-war building programs. My youthful mum and dad are buried in these photographs here, and that's a photo of my gran winning Citizen of the Year in 1969 for her work bringing the community together, doing trips, food growing, etc. I suppose this is just to say that we can't underestimate how council housing transformed people's lives for the better, improved their living conditions, but also built a strong community spirit. I'm sure we all know that the right to buy sell-off has obviously had positives and negatives, but it feels like it's played a part in the unraveling of that sort of spirit. Next slide. Again, I know there's been events previous to this one, and you've probably touched on these things, but I'm sure we're all aware of the high-profile recent demolitions at the Wynford estate and the one that's ongoing in Cluny Park, Scotland's Chernobyl, and the issues we're facing with our existing housing stock. Next slide, please. So these are often blitzed and replaced by what I would describe as cookie-cutter orthodox new urbanist principles in cities, and then in the more suburban model, it's dominated by the volume house builder marketplace of detached suburban sprawl. And recent research, which I find really interesting, by Mikhail Riches, who delivered the Stirling Prize affordable housing in Norwich, indicated that around 50% of the allocated land for these type of developments is given over to roads and parking and pavements, and almost next to none of it is actually put out there for shared green space. And I think that's one of the issues we need to start to tackle. Next slide, please. So again, these will probably be housing exemplars that you're aware of, where they're mixed, shared and connected communities. They include co-housing in Lancaster, in Bridport and Cambridge, social rented homes in Norwich, private for sale homes in Essex, and mixed tenure homes at the Findhorn Eco Village, which I'm going to go on to talk about in a little bit more detail. But it shows the high quality social housing and co-housing can be built based on a community principles, sustainability and dignity. Next slide, please. So this is a project that we've been working on for a number of years now. We researched those previous projects as part of the work on this project for a new intergenerational mixed-use community. It's called Dallas Do, on the edge of Forres, just up in Moray. So that's the Moray Firth in the distance there. And Findhorn Eco Village is very close by for those of you that know the area. So we started, next slide, started with the principles of investigating the places that surrounded it. So there's Forres itself, and Findhorn, the historic village, the settlement patterns of placemaking, those historic references. In particular, the linear forms and the image in the top right-hand corner, these stripples, they're called, the green lanes that are evident in Findhorn, and how you move down those shared spaces and access new homes. Next slide. Our client is the Altyre estate, and they own the land and the estate that adjoins it. And the ambitions for this project have really been set from the outset by Altyre. It's turned into a collaborative project with Moray Council as our client, as well as a number of other stakeholders. But these photographs show some of the incredible estate buildings that we've studied and used as reference points as well for our project. Next slide. So the master plan has evolved out of some site-specific interpretations, the local patterns of Findhorn and Forres, the estate building typologies, using these linear forms, interconnected buildings, with and trying to work with the undulating landscape, and placing emphasis on shared green space, orientated to exploit views and connections and sunny garden spaces, and make connections to the wider shared landscape. And we've used courtyard typologies, the patterns of linear fingers that turn to exploit sunlight and create connectivity. There's loads of ambitions in this project. So there's affordable homes, private for sale homes, there's bespoke student housing, which you'll see in a minute, as well as a housing innovation initiative. So we're progressing that currently with Moray Council and BEST and the Digital Health and Care Innovation Centre. And I know you've talked about materials and material innovation, tenure innovation, and digital care innovation to try and get people back living in their, or remaining in their homes, rather than get bed blocking in hospitals. I hate that expression, but so we're exploring the use of felling timber on the estate, working it locally with local sawmills, and then using that to form the structural frames, as well as the cladding, the landscaping, finishes, etc. Next slide. Terraces are used to drive density, with the first phase of affordable homes, delivering a range of house types. So that was a key driver. The housing mix covers everything from one-bed cottage flats all the way through to amenity bungalows, right the way through to four-bed family homes. So we're trying to cultivate a rich environment where people live next to each other and share separating walls and garden spaces that connect to each other. Next slide. So you can start to see some of the images. There's three-story townhouses, there's the cottage flat terraces, there's two-bed, three-bed family homes with a ground floor bedroom, so people can actually still live in the house, or they can the granny flat can be used. but we're working hard to work with private garden space that spills out and connects into open shared landscape space. Next slide. And then a bespoke student housing courtyard. So Glasgow School of Art have got their School of Innovation and Technology up there. That's based on the estate in the Steading buildings. And so we're working to deliver 40 bed spaces of student homes intermixed into this new community. Next slide. And this is actually a cluster development that we're progressing at the southern end of the site, which will be private for sale, but is based on the Smart Clachan principles, a shared green living lane route that connects across, that the community shares, shared foul drainage strategy, shared power strategies as well. Next slide. Hopefully you can see that text a wee bit small, but just in terms of the intergenerational principles, talk about the 4 T's. The first one being tenures. And at government level, we need to treat housing as a critical part of our infrastructure, giving it the same status as energy and roads. And I see the announcements today on building 39 billion of money going towards affordable housing, but what we don't want that to do is to go in the orthodox approaches, but how can we cultivate intergenerational living and co-housing opportunities. We need to be more proactive from a planning policy perspective to stipulate intergenerational living principles in new developments, in the same way as we require 25% affordable housing provision, or in rural environments, the rural housing burden as well. We also need a range and mix of tenures to cultivate that richness and difference, everything from affordable social rent through to rent-to-buy opportunities, because I think we still need to acknowledge that the market is still driven by that strong, powerful force to own homes. And we need to promote intergenerational living initiatives in the same way as volume house builders promote their private for sale developments for wider awareness, so that they understand the opportunities. Our experience here, we've done a number of community engagement events. There is a real culture in the local area for custom self-build opportunities, service plots, probably unlike a lot of the rest of Scotland, where there isn't really a culture of building your own home, unlike other countries. Yeah, how do we make that part of the discussion that people have when they're thinking about moving into a new home? Second T, typologies. So we need to drive the densities to deliver more homes for less carbon. We need to arrange that range of house types, everything from tiny homes through to amenity housing, through to varying sizes of family homes. The third T is toolkits. So we need to think about design codes that allow homes to be added to over time, and how do you design those? How can they be adapted and extended? How can they actually be fitted out so that they're cheaper and have space to actually then fit out over time? We need a rich landscape to design safe, accessible, shared space for play, for community growing, even for events, and even on Findhorn, they've actually started to instigate natural swimming ponds as well. So we have had a lot of dialogue with Greenleaf Design and Build. We need to think about how we can fund and deliver shared facilities, and think about how laundries and kitchens and tool sheds and sharing hoovers and sharing washing machines can help cultivate a community and also help with the climate emergency. And we need to think about alternative utility strategies. Everything, the real challenges of trying to deliver a housing project that doesn't connect into a SEPA sewer is huge, and it really comes from the top down. And then also thinking about transport initiatives, so integrating public transport and social amenities to reduce car dependency, and think about how parking can be positioned so it doesn't dominate housing and the shared landscape, and then how car sharing and pooling initiatives can develop. And the last T, tolerance, and I think we've talked about this previously, but it's this idea of persuading people of the value of living together that you mentioned. And and how that will alleviate social separation, and advocate for the benefits of community communication and compromise. So, in my opinion, the concept of intergenerational living isn't really radical. It's really going back to the old models that council housing was built around, that knowing your neighbours, knowing them for life, them popping in, gardens with boundaries that aren't 2 meters high, that you can walk in and out of people's front doors, that you support each other, which was my experience growing up, extended family, friends, and how that can help to create new mixed, shared, connected communities to improve health and well-being and foster a renewed sense of belonging. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Robin. And again, a bit of my own personal experience. I'm half Norwegian, so no hedges. I couldn't get out. I don't know what it is with the British and their fences. My home is my castle, but my God, in Norway you have to just climb over a stone, to get to the next person's. And the other thing is that when my cousins, when they decorate their house, they don't use a decorator. I don't know what it does for the local sort of workforce, but you invite your friends over for the weekend. It's completely different. So I looked the length and breadth of Scotland to try and find some people who experienced intergenerational living. I was about to give up, but then luckily my last two speakers have done. The first of those two is Sehrish Azad, and I'm delighted that we've got a representative from another community, the Muslim community, because obviously different cultures treat this differently, and so it'd be really interesting to hear. And Sehrish works for a charity that helps refugees. So, would you like to use the thingamajig, because you haven't got slides? Oh. No, there's a thingamajig thing, what do you call it?
A mic.
A mic, that's the thing. All right, there we go. We have to press this somewhere.
Just push it up, I think.
What, push up? Yeah, that's it.
Hello, hi everyone. My name is Sehrish. Thank you for the introduction, Gail. It's lovely hearing what everyone's got to say. It's obviously unfortunate that we have to have these kind of conversations, but hopefully we're moving, the right way forward. So yes, I do work with a charity that does aid refugees. We do deployments in Lebanon, in Turkey, in Jordan, and it's amazing, and it keeps me humble and grateful every single day. And yes, I am a Muslim, and I am Pakistani as well. My dad is born in Pakistan. My mum is born in Huddersfield, not anywhere fancy. And I was born in Scotland, Edinburgh, along with my two brothers. And yeah, so I live with my grandparents. Well, my granddad, he's passed away now, but my grandmother, which we call Dadi, and Dada is for grandfather. And so my daddy still lives with us, and again, that is another thing that keeps me humble and grateful every single day. I know with everything there's pros and cons, but I'm very grateful that I do have a lovely grandmother, lovely parents as well, and I'll just explain why I believe intergenerational housing is a pro. It's valued very much so in our culture and in our faith. In Islam, we do value the care for youngers, for elders, for our parents. It's very, very important, and I've been raised that way. So when I was actually born, my grandparents got their visa to actually come to Scotland for the first time. So Mum says that it's amazing that they came for me, not my older brother. So that was great. So they've been here ever since I've been born, and it's been amazing because I'm sure my mum was grateful for the late nights when the kids were up, and they had an in-house babysitter as well. But yeah, so in our faith we do value it, we care for them, and it's in a way that when they raised us when we were younger, we now help them with things that they can't do themselves. As you raise a child, you kind of raise your elders in a way. I'm sure my grandmother made me breakfast when I was younger, because now in the mornings I'm making her breakfast for her. I just tell her, sit down, I'll pop the TV on, I'll make her French toast or maybe whatever she wants that's in the fridge. So yeah, in Islam it's very, very much valued, and in our culture as well, in our Pakistani culture. Even a simple thing, for me, it's so normal. Like I was saying, I was speaking to folk out there, it's something that's so normal for me that is wildly not normal here. And I know all of my cousins, my friends, my Pakistani friends, even Bengali friends, they live with their grandparents, and it's such a valued thing, and it makes the house feel full. It makes it, there's love there, there's support, it's just fullness, and it's cozy, and it's kind as well. And even such a simple thing like in my culture, which I'm not sure, maybe it'll be a South Asian, it's just probably a South Asian thing as well. When I come home and my grandmother's there, my daddy's there, I always say hello to her. We say Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be upon you. And then I lower my head to her and she touches it so that's like a form of a blessing to an elder. And that's something that's not very common here at all. And with my parents, I'll give them a hug or something. But it's such a kind thing to know, it's humbling to lower your head for someone who's gone through so much. And that leads me to my next point, that it kind of fills in the wisdom and the stories that our elders are able to tell us. So my daddy, she's the eldest of 9 children. So she has only 3 siblings left, but she's lived a very full life. Begin of a very unfortunate one. She was probably about 5 years old when the partition between Pakistan and India was taking place. They had to flee. It was very unfortunate, but I have the ability to know these stories because I live with them, and I'm able to understand, and I'm able to be humbled and know that her, when she was 5 years old compared to when I was 5 years old, is insanely different. I have a roof. I have loving and kind parents who are caring for me. I know my grandmother's mother passed away when she was quite young, but it's just knowing that she's been through so much, and that wasn't what she chose. It was chosen for her, and she is so resilient in every single way. My grandfather as well, and rest in peace. He was a lovely, lovely man. And I just remember him, when we were younger, he'd used to do these kind of army exercises because he was training in the army when he was younger. So my brothers would follow him. And it was just interacting in such random but beautiful ways. So knowing that my daddy had gone through such horror, essentially, it makes you take a step back to know that life is not just what we think life is. It's so different for everyone. Everyone that's going through the same Monday is going through so many different things. But yeah, so I was able to know these stories, and there's still so many stories. My daddy, she probably got married when she was very young. I think she was probably about 13 when she got married. So her being in Pakistan, again, that was very normal. She had about 7, 8 kids, or even to know that her kids have passed away when they were very young. This is actually, this is another story that I know. She told me that her daughter passed away when she was quite young, but she laughed, and I was like, that's not normal to laugh, but for her, this is just one of those things that happened to her. And for us, we take every single thing that happens to us very, very, very on the heart, and obviously that is a very unfortunate thing, but for her it was just one of those things. But another thing that I'm able to communicate with her, language, knowing that we have that cultural continuity. Even though I am living in Scotland, I know English, but I also speak Urdu and Punjabi, and to know that I'm able to communicate with her, along with when I go back to Pakistan, I can speak to my cousins and the neighbors and everyone there. So she has been able to keep that gap of the language, the traditions, the language, sorry, I just said that. The food is another one so big in our culture, to know that when I began cooking, my daddy was there in the kitchen. She was like, this is how you do it. This is how you're cutting your onions. So it's not only the stories, but she's also passing down recipes, things that keep people close together, cooking and music and traditions. So there's so many reasons as to why I think intergenerational housing is such a positive, it's such a value. Knowing that when I go home, my daddy will be sitting there and she will be crocheting on that sofa, watching a movie, and then she'll just ask how my day is. And they keep such an emotional and spiritual presence in that house that our parents, yes, they're blessings, but elders, they know things that we will never know. They hold such a wisdom that we will never know until essentially we are their age. We've been through what they've been through. And it's something that I will genuinely from my heart promote. I'm very, very blessed knowing that all my life I've had this. And it's upsetting knowing that other people haven't had that. And I really do wish that people are able to see the beauty in it. And I know family are not easy. I know that for a fact, but it's able to keep you grounded, and it definitely has. I'm very, very grateful for my grandparents and the ones before them that have gone through everything just for me to be here. And it keeps me very humble. So yeah, thank you guys for listening.
Thank you, Sehrish. Talking to that. Thank you, Sehrish. There was so much that resonated, and I don't normally get very personal on these things, but it just, for example, you saying how she laughed. My husband, who did not have any exposure to intergenerational, death, he can't talk about death. You know, I was holding my grandfather's hand when he died. My mother lay in a coffin in the sort of den room for about a week before she was buried. I used to look at her skin colour changing. So death was normal. So I find I have a much better relationship with death than some of my friends who haven't. It's very, very interesting. Do your non-Muslim friends, do any of them see what you've got and think, oh, I wish we had that? Have you ever heard any comments from them?
I'm trying to think now. I've not heard any comments. I think they think it's cute, but I've not heard any comments.
Right.
That really.
That's a shame. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So the last person is Julia Behrendt, who is a green builder, an environmental designer. She lives on the Isle of Lismore. I did find that I could find more people in the outer isles and islands generally who could talk about on this subject. And so that's why we've got one remote speaker. So Julia, hello, are you there? Yeah, hello, Julia. I don't know where I wave.
Can you see the slide all right? Hello, can you see the slide?
Yes.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm Julia. Yes, like Gail said, I'm a green builder and environmental designer. And I'm based on the Isle of Lismore, where I've lived now for 9 years. I stayed in lots of different forms of shared housing over the years. Like most people, I started out with my family, in my case also my grandparents, which I'm very glad about. And then when I moved out, lived in different shared flats in Hamburg, mostly with people my age. And when I went into travel, I stayed in lots of different volunteering places, a few of which were eco-communities, and then eventually moved to Scotland and the Isle of Lismore. Here, the housing crisis demanded to be very adaptable, so I stayed in a caravan for a while on a friend's croft. I shared houses with people of different ages, and when I started working part-time for Greenleaf and Findhorn, I stayed with a lovely lady in the East Winds community. On the island, I now live in a housing terrace with lovely neighbours and a very nice housemate. And between those different types of communities, I really like living on an island. I like to call this an unintentional community because here necessity is the mother of cooperation. And I feel that creates quite a strong community that focuses on common challenges and objectives rather than individual differences. We're literally all in the same boat surrounded by water, and that makes for great social glue. Personally, I quite like my solitude, but I also always enjoyed living with other people. I like that no 2 days are the same and daily life just has more surprises. I get to learn new things and get help and support. And also, daily challenges are just more bearable when you can share them, especially in the remote rural areas where life is just throwing things at you the whole time. And then together you can have a moan about the broken island car or that the hare dug up the vegetable bed. When it comes to different generations, what I like about living with older people is that they're great for putting things into perspective. They generally have a more relaxed attitude to life. They've seen it all. And with younger people, it's great to learn new things from, get excited about stuff and be inspired by them. Generally, living with different age groups, I find I compare myself less and just see life in the bigger picture. Like every close human relationships, living in the same house particularly, of course, also needs extra work. And especially if you're working full-time, that extra engagement can be straining. So I'm really interested in how to strike a balance between the communal and the private. And like it was highlighted before, nationally, we've got very much changing circumstances in that there's a rise in single households and lots of resource pressures also on smaller families. So the big question is, how do we live together well? What I quite like about living with strangers is that you don't have familiar hierarchies and dynamics that you maybe know from families or partnerships. So while living together on an equal footing requires a new framework with a lot less assumptions, there's also a great chance for drawing up arrangements that really acknowledge and respect everybody's needs and boundaries. But it is work. The biggest problem on the island is, particularly for older people, that they have to leave the island in their old age before they really want to, because they feel they can't take care of themselves or the house anymore. So here, house share with a younger person might be a good solution. But the question is, how big is the willingness to share a space again at that age and make compromises? So that's maybe something everybody could think about too. What I've observed myself is that the need for privacy in everyone is quite strong. And if this is not built in the home or the agreement, then people will create it despite all good communal intentions. What often strikes me, particularly in intentional communities, is, for example, how houses facing each other are gradually obstructed by shrubs, blinds, or window stickers. So that feeling of passive togetherness is really only valued outside the home, but once inside, there's a strong desire for seclusion. The daily life at home is very personal and also strongly culturally influenced. So it takes a lot of active listening and seeking understanding to share a kitchen space, for example. I also have to point out that the majority of the time I lived with other people, I lived in their space. I've only been the main tenant in 2 house shares, and that makes quite a difference. So it's really worth being aware of that in the decision making in the home, making sure everybody feels comfortable. I feel house shares especially require good matchmaking, so speaking a similar language metaphorically or sharing similar values just makes negotiating needs a lot easier. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. I don't know where I'm meant to be looking to. Thank you. But that's really interesting, because we've had the sort of family perspective and now a house share, and Julia's saying how you avoid the dynamics, what can be unfortunate dynamics of families, you sort of start afresh. So that was very interesting perspective. I said I was going to open up straight to you, and I'm not. I'm going to abuse my power. Okay, I want to step back slightly, because this is Architectural Fringe, and we will be talking about buildings, I know. So I want to step back from that a bit. Don't you hold that. So, Savannah, you're talking about designing a society. Do you think that can be done? Do we need devices like buildings? Or are there other mechanisms which we can change society to respect? I'm not saying it won't suit everyone, but that more people understand the benefits of intergenerational living and therefore embrace it.
Absolutely. So I have been researching intergenerational communal housing, and I have some recommendations coming out, and they are absolutely not all about piloting new communal living projects. It's a spectrum, and within that spectrum there's social infrastructure, there's physical infrastructure, there's culture. All of that has been intentionally designed in some way. I'm not saying that the intentional designs have always been super successful, but I do think that when I talk about design, I'm definitely not just talking about
Could you give a couple
physical
of examples,
design.
please?
Yeah, of course. So when we're talking about culture, I mean, I showed the media. That's designing a culture. When we're having policies that make it very easy to do X, Y, Z, but not easy to do something else, you're designing a culture that makes people think that that's the route that they want to go down. When we're talking about social infrastructure, this is about how do we relate to one another. So that's physical spaces are a massive enabler of that, but conflict. How is conflict seen in our society? Are any of us do any of us see conflict as something inevitable that we need to learn to work with? Or is conflict something we have no experience of unless it's a really traumatic event, and then we decide to put that away in a little box and never think about how conflict is resolved in a healthy way? This is all design. I'm using design in the broadest sense, but design is about putting things in place to enable a certain outcome. Social design as well as physical design, definitely.
And do you think this sort of respect for individuality in the Western society is compatible for sort of tolerance as well? I mean, it should be, but it seems to be that as we've gone down the more individualistic route, we are less tolerant. Do you think that's true, or?
Yeah, 100%. So what, like you said, what I'm talking about, I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm not trying to claim that this is this like cool idea that I've come up with in the last year. Intergenerational living was common until the early 20th century and remained common in many communities. It's just communities that are super individualist, super capitalist, based around competition and based around this kind of nuclear family zero-sum game where tolerance is going to be lower for these kinds of ideas. And that's why I think that we need to shift culture. And I think people are calling out for something different. There's many overlapping crises that we're facing, and there's young parent. Often people think it's older people that benefit from communal living. There's young parents who are, desperately trying to pay for childcare. There's all of these things going on. There's people my age who have just seen this isolated kind of rental market. And so there's benefits across the board, but yet it's very culturally different from what many of our social influencers have been pushing, which is why I think that cultural shift is a big part.
Thank you. Would anyone in the audience... Tom? Oh, sorry, you're meant to have a mic, aren't you? Yeah. Is there a roving? There is a roving one, so we shouldn't have to. I don't know if Jen or Glow, if you could hand out the roving one. Thank you, Jen.
I just kind of bringing it back to the Architecture Fringe and speaking as an architect. I just wonder if at the heart of this, there's a kind of fundamental problem about the way we practice architecture, in that, from my point of view, architecture is fundamentally a relational practice, and what we're talking about here is about relations. So it's the spaces between things and how we inhabit them and share them that's really the key, rather than the objects themselves. But we're trained to make objects, and we practice in a commercial environment that is object-driven. And so I wonder, if architects are change makers, the change has to happen in the practice of architecture itself, and that, the business of architecture has been captured by the architecture of business, and we need to unpack that and bring ourselves back to be more relationship managers than sculptors of objects. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, I would agree, and it's architects are often their own worst enemies. It's a kind of ego-driven thing. It's also just I'm sure these things are spoken about at events like this all the time, but it's the marginalisation of us and the impact that we can have. And it takes an enlightened client, landowner, and a client group to buy into an approach. And as I say, it's not about actually what a house looks like. It's actually about the patterns between the houses, how the houses are. Obviously how they're made, how they're oriented, where's a front door, how does that encourage community. I joke in the office regularly, everything comes down to bins and cars, and even trying to advocate for an approach for shared communal waste bins to kind of avoid the 4 plastic bins per household that then just litter gardens, and there's then bin wars that I'm sure we all hear about, speaking to parents and friends and all that. It encourages people to leave the front door, encourages people to cooperate together. The notion and the endless conversations we've had with housing associations and planners, and making the case to say, well, we can try this with gardens without 2-metre high fences. We'll save a fair bit of money, less dods of concrete in the ground and fence posts and endless lines of kind of monotonous timber fencing. But it can go in if it's not a success. And it was almost saying that encouraged people to go, right, well, let's give it a crack. And how private garden space can act as a transition to shared open space. Even suggesting things like, how can a kid go and find an open shared space or a space to play without having to cross a main road. The Scottish Government policies that were brought in and heralded in the late 90s with devolution, designing streets and architecture policies, that you could count on probably one, maybe two hands, the amount of new build developments that have actually delivered genuine shared streets. That idea that a pavement doesn't have to be divided by a carriageway, and that not every front door has to face onto the street, so that 50% of houses have nice sunny gardens and 50% on the other side of the street have a north and east facing garden and nobody wants to spend any time in it. So it's trying to slightly shift the dial to just encourage structural changes at the master plan level, or the kind of urbanist level, and not worry yes, of course, find it difficult not to worry about what it looks like, and is it composed beautifully, and you talk about materials and all the rest of it, but just getting the basics right of waste management, driving the idea of alternative parking arrangements, which is the biggest challenge, because all the local authorities just have their policies that said, no, it has to be this. So can you group them together in courts, and then those courts feed across green space into back gardens, so you enter a back door, because that allows you to have a south-facing garden, but the front door of the house faces a street, and it doesn't have car parking in front of it. So it's all these things that I think it's just the structural principles, and not worrying quite as much about what a house looks like.
Thank you, Robin. Julia, did you want to come in on that at all, just as another designer? Don't worry if not.
No, that's fine. I think Robin built that subject. Thank you.
Okay. By the way, if I do forget, just shout out, because I can't see you, unfortunately, because the screen's behind us. So I won't see you waving a hand if you want to come in on a question. Would anyone like to? I wouldn't mind trying to step a bit away from architecture for a bit. If anyone's got a non-architectural question, right? Yes. Do you want to pass the? Because I think we will come back there, and certainly I will as an architect.
Thank you. I think it's great to have these exemplars of new kind of shared housing for people to use going forward. But from the presentations, the thing that struck me was that the majority of the problem here is with existing houses and existing places and how we go about fixing them. We had the example of the suburban development, the sort of Privet Drive scenario where everyone's too far apart from each other. Where the scenario of the council housing that maybe doesn't kind of feel as friendly as it perhaps used to, because a lot of it was sold off, or the example in London where everyone's renting, no one talks to each other. What are the catalysts that you can use to get that kind of culture of sharing back and talking to each other? How do people change that on an individual level, on a group level, whatever kind of level it might be?
Yeah, $1 million question, that, isn't it? Who would like to? Yes, Savannah, I think.
The first thing I would say is COVID was a really interesting example where we were chatting to this about this earlier, and this is why it just came into my head, where some people just did stuff themselves. So some people who I've met and spoke to just pedestrianised their street themselves and have since been trying to maintain that, but they've maintained things like a tool library, WhatsApp group, regular parties on the street, which is technically not a pedestrianised street, but look, if they've got 50 people out in the streets, it becomes pedestrianised. So I think there's this whole spectrum of building community in neighbourhood and using place to do that, and using buildings and using whatever else to do that. And I think that we're going to be our own worst enemies if we're super authoritarian about it. I think there's catalysts, there's things like what are we all using that's lying dormant that we could share? So many things. You've talked about loads of things, but there's also like small things, books, board games. There's childcare is such a challenge for so many single parents, and so many people on the street are struggling on their own, cooking. So I do think this is why I talk about neighbourisms and neighbouring. I think it's radical. It's a radical thing to do, to give in a non-transactional way. And I think that's really where I would start. It sounds a bit cheesy, but I do think that that's where a lot of this stuff begins, and that's how community starts to develop. And I think it's unfortunate, like you said at the beginning, I couldn't agree more, that we're having to have this conversation. But I did not grow up at all with anything like what you've described, and I see it getting less and less with my nieces and nephews and whatever. So yeah, I think learning from places where it's already happening and where it's natural and normal is the start. Did you want to
talking about the streets? So I just want to pick up on that, because in Bristol, it originated in Bristol, the initiative to reclaim the street. That was a really great initiative. I think it's been adopted in a few other cities now, where parents literally put blockades at the end of their streets so that the children could play, and that brought people together. And eventually the council said, okay, we'll let you officially do it. I mean, originally they were just like guerrilla taking up the street, but that initiative has cottoned on and has now become established by the council. So, you could have councils saying, right, maybe we could do that to a few more streets, because then people come out and play ball. I mean, I was listening to the radio and they were talking about how the amount of signs you get now everywhere, no ball games, no this, and it's like, where are they meant to do these things? So I think going via children is possibly quite a good way, because children bond much quicker than we do. So it could be a useful tool. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, I was just going to say, is that on? Yeah. I agree with what you're saying about neighbours as well, and beginning there. As much as we want to see in others, we have to do it in ourselves as well. This is something I was actually talking about with my friend earlier on, and she was saying, she sees someone on TikTok, for example, and she talks to people like strangers, for example, and it's so bizarre. But I was like, that's actually not a bizarre thing. We think it's bizarre because of how life is now for us, especially after COVID. You're just very much isolated, especially elders, and if they are living alone, it's so sad. You just have to begin with yourself, just smiling, speaking to someone on the bus, anything, and it'll bring that encouragement. And I think sometimes the younger generation as well, they're very, very nervous to speak to other people because they weren't raised like that. But yeah, I think speaking to your neighbours, I'm lucky because one of my neighbours is actually my cousin, so that's not an issue speaking to her. But my other neighbours, they moved out, so it was nice. We were very friendly with them. We helped them move out. New neighbours moved in. Traditionally, we do cook food for them. We give them food, and just having that rapport building up in their own time as well. But just to know that there is someone next door that you can speak with, and it's just maybe the openness of just knowing that you can say hi and it's not bizarre to speak to strangers. But yeah, I think with children as well, it's a good way to know that there's other children there for them to communicate and talk and everything. But yeah, that's all I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Is Julia, I mean, if Julia can put your hand up, then Glow or Jen can let me know if all right, hello. Julia.
Yeah, I think just on the note of like, how do we start the sharing? I think the most radical thing we can probably do is ask for help and make that more normal. And I think there's such a stigma attached around asking for help. And I think that's one of the main things COVID removed, because we're all in a kind of very extreme situation and we all suddenly needed something. But it was okay to ask for help because everybody was in the same situation. And I feel that's been very quickly removed once we got back into daily life. And for me, that's one of the things I really like about being on an island, because you're literally cut off. So if I need something, it's a day out of my working week to go into town and get it. So it's very short to write on the notice board, does anybody have this tool? Can anybody help with that? Is anybody available Wednesday morning for moving furniture or whatever? And there's just a different culture where people actually take a positive sense of pride in being able to provide that help as well. People can't be fast enough in replying to your kind of ask. So it's just changing the culture around that and not making asking for help like a sign of weakness or lower social standing, but just going, let's just normalize this. And it's a little bit like hitchhiking. I find hitchhiking really nerve-wracking. I don't like standing by the side of the road, and holding my thumb out. And generally, I tried to avoid it where I could, but sometimes I was in situations where I needed to do it. And it feels so bad. And the question is, why does it feel so bad? And it's maybe for all of us to cross that threshold and hold the thumb out and go like, can anybody help? And we might be surprised how many people come forward. And the more we do that, the more that just becomes normal.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Julia. Craig?
Yeah, we started to move into activism there, and the etymology of radical is root, comes from the Latin radix, and so it's quite deliberately chosen. But most people think it's about being really annoying and doing something very different. It's not. It's actually about root and then what happens once you have that. And the reason for doing this one was also at the Co-Housing Scotland event, and thank you, Co-Housing Scotland, for inviting me. I was struck by the Orkney Co-Housing Group, who I sat in a meeting with them with civil servants, and they were old enough not to care at all about the activism they had, because they were cross, they were angry, and they held those civil servants' feet to the fire. Hasn't changed anything yet. And the other one was at the Rural Housing Conference, where beginning of last year, where the very young
Sapphire Accra, who I asked and was going to come, and I hadn't realised she was only 14, and I was told she was too young to travel from Lewis. I was like,
So and it's called the Radical Housing Conference. So the key thing is we're almost in danger of describing that intergenerational living is apple pie. But why are we not doing more of it? And what now needs to be true to make it happen? And the way I positioned that was I just want to arc between the elderly co-housing group and the energy they had on Orkney with the very young, and cut out the difficult to move middle bit. So I'm kind of really interested in where might we now go to make more of this happen, be more pirate, be more guerrilla. Those are some of the words you've been using. So it's more a provocation about how radical do we believe we can be in the delivering of better housing in Scotland or England or anywhere else. And I'll stop.
Nice. I was going to say we should go and eat, but quickly, that's, please go ahead, yes. It's all right, I mean, I've already overlapped, it doesn't matter, you can eat at your
And
tables.
this is, anyway, I'll just launch in, I won't try to explain what it is. I live in a block of 42 flats in a modernish build in Edinburgh, and we have a leaky roof. And so now we've had to form an owners association, and we have to work together with the factor and with the people. And it's a very torrid and uncomfortable and frustrating process, but it has created people talking to each other. And people do have to talk to each other now. And we do have to chase up the people who haven't paid. We have to knock on people's doors, and we have a committee. So that is almost like a tiny, radical, renegade beginning of people living together.
They always say weather brings people together, but leaky roofs, that's a new one. Thank you. Okay, so if people would like to go and grab food and drink, and David, you're just saying leaving it open, a small donation. There's not a specific amount you'd like for the food, then. How much do you want? How much do you want, David? Well, anyway, there's a little thing at the end for donations towards food and drink. Oh, right. Gordon.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to make just one or two observations. I mean, I love some of the comments, but, I'm sort of feeling, in here that in the cities, the closer we are, we seem to be further apart in a kind of cultural and familial way. And I think I completely agree with Craig stolen my thunder there, because I think we've got to find a way maybe to bury the zeitgeist and just get on with it, to be brave, find the mechanism, because in truth the kind of high level help is not there, so you're going to have to find a way around it somehow to get the funding, create that opportunity. And I think we are too hung up on, speaking as an architect as well, I feel sort of guilty. We are too hung up on the zeitgeist. We've got to kind of look after our communities, embrace change. And I loved the point Savannah made about the COVID. Yeah, it was kind of in a way it was kind of terrible but liberating. And I'm fed up of this meaningless, endless consultation, apparently, that we're invited to take part in, which the decision's probably already been made behind the scenes. We do have to rebel and kind of find a way through, cut out all of that nonsense. Resolve procurement is a disaster still, and we have to do that, it seems, ourselves. You've got to find, even in a small way, find how you're going to get through that barrier to take projects forward, because you're not going to get it in the short or medium term.
Right, so pushing towards radical solutions here. This is going to be a fun second half. Okay, I think we're going to get going now with the second half of Radical Housing Scotland Part 3. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. And now I'm introducing the second of our artistic interludes. I'm delighted to have a newcomer to SEDA land. So I've not heard Zoe sing live before, which is very exciting. Zoë Bestel, who is a singer-songwriter, and she calls her music new folk. I've yet to ask you what new folk means, but I'm sure we'll discover. And you hail from Dumfries and Galloway,
yeah.
And so not too far away. And I'll let you introduce your song.
Okay, this is called Utopia. I guess it is my mantra for hope and the possibilities. I'm sure you will resonate with it more than most of the people that I play this song to.
From the garden we will eat abundant fruit shall line the streets, or will shelter from the rain in homes that we all own and made. Utopia. From the garden we will eat, assisted by our friends beneath, nourishing our souls and soil. Cherish the cycle in which we are born. Utopia. Listen to John when he tells you to imagine. Simple but strong, we'll act with good intention. From the garden we will eat. Take a breath and We are all one with divine love and expression of harmonious song to sustain living's creation. We are here, Utopia, be here now. We are here, Utopia, be here now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. That was beautiful. And do both Sophie and Zoe have websites? You know, do look them up and support artists who are supporting the environment. It's an absolute privilege to work with both of you, so thank you. Right. Yes, it's always, as I say, difficult to go on straight after something like that. But I did have a thought, actually, sort of on how you get people together. And I don't know if any of you have seen the Simon Reeves series at the moment on telly. You can watch it on iPlayer because it's literally just finished. But he did Scandinavia in 3 episodes. And the one on Denmark, which has all the great co-housing examples, everyone's a member of lots of different societies, clubs. That's a great way of getting people together too. You know, everyone's a member of a choir or a dog grooming club or whatever it happens to be. So it's just another way of possibly, if you're wanting to try and, you know, instill some sort of community spirit. Right. I've got some things I've got a few more architectural questions, but are there any more questions that relate more just to society and radical movements and such like? Yes?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question, but I think when you talk about housing, it's really important to talk about economic relationships. Who owns the property? Who gives money to finance all those things? And I think that has a very, very big influence on how we then relate to each other socially here, equally or unequally. So I don't know. Yeah, I think it's important to talk about that.
Would any, so you sort of touched on that a little, didn't you? And Robin very slightly. Would either of you or any of you like to? Yeah, oh, we lost our mic. Oh, it's in here, right, got you. How does it come out? Right, thank you.
Thanks. I could be wrong, but I think what you're referring to is power dynamics based around kind of different payment structures. And this is something that I've come across a lot. Despite how people might try, often in mixed tenure, there's kind of a power dynamic. Bless you. It's kind of a power dynamic between owners and renters, power dynamic between kind of people who are on affordable housing, people who aren't in mixed spaces. I think I'm just going to answer really briefly to this and say I think where it's made really explicit and people are trying explicitly to tackle power dynamics, I think it's fine. I think it becomes a problem when people are trying to hide or not be open about power dynamics that are caused by different economic kind of put-ins to a community. Yeah, that's just my take. Do you want to go for it?
I'm not sure whether this is what you're getting at, but I'm just trying to interpret. The expression tenure blind is used a lot, and how we do developments that facilitate that. So there will we can't wish away the private ownership or if we wanted to, or the fact that some people, particularly in this environment, won't own their home. The issue I have is when you see all these new housing developments rolled out, and you can explicitly see the affordable portion pushed to the main road. It's done to look a bit like the private for sale housing, but it done in a cheaper way. And it's all put in one part of the site, and it's the antithesis of that 10-year blind mentality. And I don't understand why. Yes, the volume house builders and developers have a lot of power, economic generation, all the rest of it. But why can't planning policy stipulate that that's just not allowed anymore, and that it has to be woven in? And in a way that then actually helps with delivery, because 25% affordable allocations, for instance, can they be delivered through a phased delivery mechanism that then means that the affordable homes are woven in, or flats or whatever are woven into a wider development. So I just think that's just a simple, straightforward policy shift that could happen quite easily. I had another point. I've forgotten what I was going to say. Sorry, it was the most important one too. No, just experientially, that was what I was going to say. Anecdotally, I have attended lots of community engagement events, and we can't wish this mentality or way of thinking away, but where people who live in a house seem to forget that their house needed to be built at some point, and that changed the circumstances of other people that lived nearby that house. And there's a big small c conservative attitude that exists that says the world can't change around you, and I think we need to combat that. I'm not sure how. But there's also, and I've been in these engagement events, which you just hear just the things said that, we don't want affordable housing anywhere near our, because it's, the attitude is, well, that will affect, my property price over, and again, we're not going to change that mentality, but you have to, the point was made earlier, that belligerence of just ploughing through it and ignoring it, and that does happen, but those attitudes will always exist, and the stigmatization of people that live in affordable homes, the old council housing, which didn't exist, my point earlier, because there was a social solidarity, because everyone lived in or a lot of people lived in a community that was all council housing, so there was no such thing as that kind of snobbery that exists now. And I just think we need to just ignore it and plough through it and accept the fact that that's going to happen and just ignore it. I don't know if that was kind of speaking to what you were trying to get at, but...
I'd like to move slightly away from new build for a bit and just, somebody mentioned existing building stock. What can we do to use building stock, existing building stock more? We've got all these people. Malcolm Fraser-Yorpano talks very eloquently about his mother in a big house because there's nowhere else she wants to go, and so she stays in it. And there are a lot of people like that, a lot of big houses. Most of the family drifted away, and it's just a couple or a single person. And then there's also the issue of extensions, flexibility you talked about. Most new housing is so cheap by jowl, there isn't any room to extend if you want a granny annex or something. So any comments from the audience or from the panel about extending, converting existing buildings for intergenerational use?
Very briefly, I would say I think retrofit is often thought about in not really a very creative way, and I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think what I'm most interested in is making a bit like creating communal space out of what exists. And I'm not just talking about housing, I'm talking about there's so many unused NHS and statutory buildings. There's some really cool examples I've seen of, like, on NHS sites, they had an unused building for years, and they partnered with some other organisations and created affordable housing for young people on an NHS site, who would then get internships at the hospital. There's huge. There's lots of opportunities, but what I would say is just like, we are in this culture, understandably, because there's a housing crisis, of every inch of housing we have, fill it with another person. But if you use a little bit of it to create community, to create social bonds, you're making housing that has much more longevity, and people will stay because they have relationships. You've definitely got something to say.
Well, yeah. I was more coming at it just purely from a design perspective, and I know you're talking shifting from new build. There's obviously the challenges of retrofit and adaptive reuse, but if I talk about say Cluny Park in Port Glasgow, or the Wynford estate, we come up with proposals where you can easily retrofit slapping through structural walls to allow a one-bedroom flat to become a three-bedroom flat, or and allows that to be repurposed and changed. And but there's just a resistance to actually doing things that actually just are common sense, because of all sorts of other cultures of the kind of the dynamite and the blowing things up. In a new build scenario, anyone that works in the affordable housing sector has had to work with documents like housing for varying needs for decades, and there's all sorts of stipulations where you need to design in knockout panels, and if someone becomes isn't able-bodied anymore, needs to be transferred from a bed to a bathroom, and you can simply remove a panel in a wall. I don't understand why you couldn't take that to another logical place where you say, right, well, let's do small houses to cater for people who can't afford a big house, but that small house could be built into the house next door if at some point that changes, and you design that in. Can we design roof spaces that aren't used on day one, but someone could move and build up into easily enough, and designing that in structurally with not a huge amount more design or cost requirements, just to future-proof a house to allow it to adapt and change over time.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be far more future-proofing. I think that could be built into regulations. I looked up in MPF4 for the non-architects. Sorry, Ariane, I'll just finish this point. Non-architects MPF4 National Planning Framework. It's the most recent one. It's generally a really good document. There's not one mention of intergenerational living in it. And that is reflected in, with my architect's hat on, I tried last year to get planning permission for a client for a small little annex for the granny and grandpa, you know, the elderly generation, to live in their garden, detached but very small. It was an obvious solution. They'll both get it just on the onset of dementia. East Lothian Council told us no, but you can build exactly the same building if it's used for short-term tourist lets. I was absolutely appalled, and we wrote to them and said the burden on the NHS, this is keeping, because they're now going into a care home on the state, you know, paid for by the state. I mean, absolute madness. So I do think I think we need more mention of it in MPF4, so that you don't get ridiculous policies like that from the planners. Ariane, yes. Mike, please. Oh, sorry. Were you going to say something first? Sorry, I didn't realise.
Jump in quick. I just really struggle with this affordable housing, and I've read somewhere that affordable housing means 80% of market value, but for social housing it's 30%, and we're just spattering around figures and things and talking about money and houses, and I really worry about how can we change the culture that a house is an investment, and the house is not for living in. And it doesn't matter how many new properties you build across the country, and if they're bought up by wealthy landlords who then rent them out, you're not going to solve the housing solution, crisis. And I think the only way you will solve it is by encouraging people that a house is to live in and to stay in, because that's went wrong with the council sell-off. People were quite happy in their council house, and it wasn't until they were all sold off and then in the hands of wealthy landlords that everything's gone pear-shaped.
Okay.
And I don't expect you to answer this question
and I
necessarily.
won't, because it's a really interesting, important question, but it's not. I'm going to try and really stick to intergenerational living, but thank you for making the point that it should be made. Ariane.
Hi, good evening. I'm Ariane Burgess. I'm a member of the Scottish Parliament. I represent the Highlands Islands region, and I'm the Greens spokesperson for housing. And before I got this job, I had another life, and part of that life was helping one of the pictures that Rob was able to take, the East Winds co-housing project, come to life. But what I wanted to talk about was this idea that's starting to come through, is that how do we get people to connect? And I'm thinking about the bungalow neighborhood I live in Forres, which is the same town where Rob is working in. And I've often thought, wouldn't it be great if we could get some kind of situation going where we were collective enough? And I think that's part of the problem. Right? We've talked about the culture. Why aren't people just doing this? Because we need to kind of come back to that. The future is about sharing. Wouldn't it be great if that community in my neighborhood bought one of the houses together? So, Gail, you were talking about extensions and things like that. Well, maybe we can't extend our actual house, but we could create an extension collectively by collectively buying a house that becomes the community house. So just pulling in the co-housing model, the whole point of a co-housing model is you have shared spaces. You have a shared dining, eating space. You have shared, at East Winds, they've got an extra room, which is a kind of guest bedroom. They've got a shared laundry. They've shared workshop and all kinds of stuff. So wouldn't it be great if all neighborhoods, all streets got a house that became that community house, and it became the place that we all shared? But the thing is you've got to have that inside us as a desire. And it was great, the point made about COVID pushed that desire. So what's going to push that desire? And I don't think yet people really understand a lot of, we don't have clear images in our heads about the future that we need to be living in very quickly. And that future is going to be involving a lot of sharing and a lot of pooling resources, or we're going to be forced into it. So that's one point. And then so that's architectural bit. So it's not about new architectural, but it's about a quick win. And the other bit is, if we want to do co-housing, so the thing to be clear about co-housing is you have your own private space. I think that was a really important point about you do need your own privacy if you're in community. But one of the things you also need is you build the environment, but you also need the tools and skills. And again, that was spoken to around dealing with conflict. And in the co-housing movement, in the community building intergenerational movement, there is a set of tools called sociocracy. And that's the tools of decision-making, governance, and all those things. And it's been adapted in amazing ways across eco-villages and communities around the world. So you need not only the built environment, but you definitely need to have the agreements and all those bits and pieces that help us navigate that scariness of becoming close. Because becoming close is wonderful, but it can also create that conflict. And then how do you navigate those bits? So all of those tools, so the built space and the social tools must come hand in hand.
Yes, so that's obviously talking about the larger groups. I mean, I don't know, Sehrish, if in the Muslim, is it always the one family unit that people tend to live intergenerationally, or do you ever have bigger large buildings where you have more than one family together?
So, as in, is there a house where other families are living?
Yes. Is that typical or is that not? It's really just the one family?
Yeah, it would normally be just the one family. Because in that culture, we take our elders to live with us. And so it's very common that every family household does have an elder, whether it's a grandfather or the grandmother. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Would you? Julia hasn't spoken for a bit. Does Julia want to respond to anything that Ariane said, or? Oh, she isn't even there at the moment. Oh, Julia, if you could wait a minute, Julia, because we haven't got you up and we're not hearing you, so you're going to have to repeat yourself, please.
Julia, is your mic turned on?
Robin, did you want to say something while we wait for Julia? Julia, we'll come back to you while we sort out the mics.
I was just going to follow up on the first point Ariane made. And I think that's a great idea. In existing communities, in terms of can they buy out a house? But I suppose I'm wondering about it for new build communities as well, and thinking that why couldn't that be a stipulation where it's designed in that could happen, and there's a location where it would be built at the appropriate time where a community grows together and develops the funds and is able to build it. It doesn't necessarily need to be, super airtight and super insulated if it's like in a shared space or a laundry or you have your shared Hoover or whatever, but you could design that into a community and know where it would be positioned over time. And again, could that be a stipulation in certain types of, over a certain number of homes, that is a requirement that is designed in as part of the planning process?
Yeah, I don't see why it couldn't be. Is Julia there yet, or? No. Right.
An observation here, or contribution.
Callum.
Yeah, I have an observation and then maybe a question on the back of that. But I completely agree that if you look at examples of good co-housing, for example, like in Denmark that's been mentioned, that it is actually quite hard work, and culturally these communities are talking to one another that I'm not sure we are here. And I would say that while there is a need for good and different types of housing here, I don't hear people crying out for it. I think on the periphery, there is mention of it. There's, small groups like ourselves talking about it. But I think most people at the moment are quite happy in their little castle, as it were. I run a project, or I should say I used to, because it's not especially active at the moment, but it's called Archie Schools. And it was about trying to encourage schools in Scotland to engage with the subject of the built environment, because our children are our next, well, maybe architects, but also planners, also clients, developers, everything. And it's giving children the sense that they can feel empowered to make changes about their built environment, and having these conversations in schools. And I think what's quite interesting, like maybe the older I get, the more I see that it's as much about how we coordinate ourselves together. This is about psychology or sociocracy, learning to live with one another. That Archie Schools almost needs to be embedded with learning about how to live next to one another and with one another. And I think what's really interesting is maybe like the comments that Savannah, that you've been making about how we do that. I would be quite interested to know, say, what your background was in terms of your education. Did you do a degree, and what was that in? And how did you get to where you are? I'll maybe let you answer that, but just to finish off my point is, it's much easier for architects, I'm an architect, if you're given a brief to do something that makes sense, rather than, Robin, what was your expression, just sort of barging through the brief? Whatever that is, it's really hard work all the time. It's much better if the brief makes sense from the beginning. And we can actually save a lot of carbon, apart from anything else, if the brief is right. So it's the early day stuff that's really important.
Thank you, Cameron.
Wow, there was a lot in there. So I'm going to answer in 3 parts, and I'm probably going to forget all of them as I go. But you mentioned people aren't crying out for it, and you mentioned the sociocracy and are we ready for it? And then you asked about my background, so if I forget any, you can hold me to account. But the first is, I think, sure, people aren't crying out for co-housing. People aren't protesting on the streets saying can we build a co-housing community? But are single parents struggling with childcare? Is mental ill health and loneliness statistics through the roof? Is there a housing crisis? Well, there's more single occupancy homes than ever. Yes to all these questions, and I would argue that on a structural level, these all imply that we are crying out for a different way of living together. And this is why I think it's a spectrum, and I don't think that being authoritarian about saying co-housing, a blueprint of co-housing is the answer. That's not what I'm saying. I think there's a huge spectrum. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I'm glad you brought up sociocracy. So I've been looking at, in my research, a lot of different ways that people self-govern. Sociocracy is one of them. Vastly becoming the most popular. Used to be consensus, or consensus with some edits and additions. So for example, consensus -1, which is, some would say, problematic, because if you have like a problematic member of community that disagrees, their opinion doesn't matter anymore. But there's lots of different ways of self-governing, and I'm really, really interested in that, so I'm happy to carry on the conversation. But sociocracy, for those people in the room who don't know, is essentially where there's different circles who are assigned different kind of areas of influence. And the idea is it's trying to make less bureaucracy so that those circles of influence can make decisions and act on behalf of a broader community, and the circles intersect. But there's there's lots of different self-governing models, and absolutely, as a society, no, we're definitely not all ready to kind of self-govern, to manage conflict, but this is why I think that a massive cultural shift is part of this. And I think a lot of our education system is problematic, but I think the fact that first aid isn't necessary is crazy. But I also think conflict resolution should be a big part, and many of these other things. But I think the way we build housing as one example, separating us from one another, makes it really easy that if you disagree with your neighbour, you'll never see them again, so it doesn't really matter. So, yeah. And then finally, you asked about my kind of how I got into this. There's a personal and there's a professional element. So the personal element is many things. I think I've seen single parent households. I've grown up around nuclear family not working out, and yet being projected by society as what everyone has, and then just seeing this kind of mismatch between being told everyone has a nuclear family and looking around and everyone having a struggling single parent. And then also as a queer person, I've always thought that this nuclear family dynamic has not really been built with me in mind. And then there's a professional element, which is that I've been working on complex social challenges and health inequalities throughout my career, and pretty much every time I speak to someone about their experience, loneliness and lack of social connection emerges. So examples could be, I did a project on malnutrition in aging. I did another project on frequent accident and emergency attendance. Both of those issues, every single person we spoke to talked about not having anyone to turn to, which meant that issues get escalated and we have this reliance on statutory services. So yeah, that's why, and I think intergenerational communal living brings together a lot of challenges that we're facing.
Thank you, Savannah.
We can try Julia again.
Oh, great, Julia. Sorry, there's been a lot going on, Julia. I hope you've taken it all in.
Yes, we can hear you now.
We can hear you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, lots of great points raised there. The first thing I was thinking about when Robin was talking about maybe we should just consult less and just kind of go for the better solution that we know is going to work out better for people. As I'm aware, in Germany now, in lots of cities, you can't build detached housing. It's just not a thing. It's not allowed. And what I found quite striking when I was at one rural housing conference some years ago, they presented the smart classroom project for youth. And they were saying, they're facing financial challenges material shortages and what we do about it within the community about this is important to them. So that's why a lot of these units were detached units. And yes, in my personal opinion, you know, it just should not be a thing. When we build houses, we build, you know, terraces. And I feel terraces for me actually are great for privacy because you're facing the same way. You're not looking into the other person's house, depending on how they're laid out. The one I'm living in is kind of, you know, we're all facing the sea. And there's a great feeling of that passive togetherness where you're next to each other and you know the other person is there, but nobody is, you know, it just kind of facilitates that. There's kind of each household has their own little garden unit in the front. So, you know, there's chats over the garden fence or around the back, over the bins. So it's kind of facilitated, but not kind of enforced, but it might be one of the first steps in the built environment to kind of just gently nudge people closer together, and they don't have to, the other person is not far. And I've talked to a couple who lives, 2 doors down from me. They're slowly getting older and seeing other people moving away from the island because they live in very isolated bungalows and are worried that if they fall, nobody will find them for days. And they really appreciate being in the terrace and just knowing that, you know, people kind of look out for each other and they just see, you know, whether someone is out and about. And it's easy to check on one another. So I think that's one of the really good solutions.
Thank you, Julia. Craig.
And when we're talking about affordability, it's an oxymoron. Affordable housing does not exist, full stop. You can be a Cambridge graduate and not be able to afford a home in any metropolitan centre in the UK today, right now, unless you couple up or the bank of mum and dad is lending. Bank of Mum and Dad, if they were a bank, they would be the 7th largest lender of mortgage finance in the country. The boomers who own all the land and houses, and sadly, I think I'm a boomer, though I hate the idea of it, the asset ownership of the boomer generation now sits at £6 trillion. If it decided that it wanted to leverage that asset at, say, 10%, then the boomer generation could become one of the biggest banks in the country if you wanted to start formalizing that. So one of the things we haven't talked about is finance, whether that's for paying for land and paying for homes or retrofitting an existing one. And so there's some innovation happening, and I'll keep this short. So HACT, which is a great name, it stands for the Housing Association Charitable Trust, but sounds like they're really hacking away at stuff. They've just traded last summer when we did our trade for carbon credits for retrofit. That's new money. And they've locked it to social value as well, which multiplies the carbon credit value. So I am as interested in what is the capital that exists, both social capital, as the desire to do better, but the actual capital, and then how it gets deployed to create better outcomes. Because 20 years ago, when the first co-housing projects were starting to roll off, there were 80 co-housing groups in the UK 20 years ago. I did the maths on that, and that was £1 billion market. Nobody thought to say, oh, wait a minute, we're a market for a type of housing that we want, and it's worth about $1 billion, and we could probably pay for it if you're a boomer. So nothing happens unless there is land or an asset existing and finance. The sociocracy piece is great, but that has to come later once you've built the stack of we do own the land, we can access the finance, then the behavioral piece is where you come in. I meet so many groups that are doing theory U, sociocracy, all the variants, all good, but they're doing it at the wrong time. They have no land and they have no finance. So that has to be stacked in a particular sequence, and then the power of sociocracy and other things really start to accelerate. Anyway, that was my,
thank you,
not a question, it's just a rant.
No, but it's someone else thinks. You were sort of muttering. Were you wanting to respond there?
Well, yeah, I don't know if I agree about the chronology, but I totally take your point, and like, if we're trying to establish sociocracy and housing's not changing, like it doesn't make any sense. But this is what I guess I'm trying to say about the spectrum is that I think we can learn to resolve conflict together and do all these things at the same time as we're trying to push for housing. And I think I've actually heard of quite a few co-housing projects fail because they've waited until the land is through or the project's through to start building community, and it's broken down because of a myriad reasons of why people have these different missions in their head, and some people think that that's going to be eco-warriors, and some people think that eco-warrior means recycling once a week or something. So I would just say, like, I totally agree with everything you've said, but I just think that there isn't a chronology to it, and I think it, like...
It was a provocation, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've provoked. Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, given there's a housing emergency and there's health emergencies, I think we just have to do everything all together at the same time. Because it's chicken and egg, isn't it? Do you get this community first that can do it, or do you have the building first? But I'm a great, being an architect, I like to think if you get the building up and it's a fantastic model of co-housing, people move into it and they'll see how wonderful it is, and then more people want it. But on the other hand, I completely get that you want to change society first. So I just think we have to do everything at the same time.
Can I just say one more thing? I think also, like, I think it's important to think about, so we're all in this room and we've all got an interest in it, but I really think that when it comes to living in more connected ways, it shouldn't just be for people who are hearing about it from an academic perspective or whatever and then engaging in it. And I think that's kind of the risk if you go with that approach of building something and then people will come, is that the people who come are the same type of people. And just on what you mentioned about HACT, HACT are doing great work in this space. I'm actually working with HACT, and they've just released a way to measure the social value of intergenerational living models, and it came out like maybe a couple of weeks ago, and they've got loads of other stuff planned. It's not been actually put into practice yet. It's like a model, but yeah, I'm happy to talk to anyone about organisations building some of how can we translate what we're all talking about into like social value numbers, and there's stuff going on there.
Any? Yes. Oh, sorry, Lucy and Zoe. Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to come back actually to a couple of things, or a number of things that have been mentioned that actually are about giving communities agency and wealth building. And, whether it's the community buying a specific house, or whether it's sharing tools, or whether it's actually shared green space, I think all of these things allow wealth building, sharing, and community building, and that gives agency, and I think communities grow out of that. And part of the issue, I think, with, say, modern housing developments and sort of stamp houses on tiny sites is it's like a model of scarcity. There isn't necessarily that space to do that. There isn't that space to build in that flexibility, to be able to extend because the gardens are too small. There isn't the space for the kind of shared green space. Everyone has their little garden. You can either put a trampoline in, or you can have a little table. There's nowhere for kids to come. And I think that there's something about that community wealth and community agenda, that actually, agency is that you really need that to actually facilitate that growth and to facilitate that power. And just in terms of we can see that there's a range of issues across society and across individuals and families. And it doesn't actually matter whether they're living isolated in single person occupying a big home, or whether you're in a tenement, or whether you're in even a bigger housing scheme. None of it is easy. All of it has challenges. And so it's kind of like pick your heart. Each of those has an impact. And I think there's a sense of, well, if you step back and you look at what are those impacts, what are those values, and almost really remembering, well, living with loneliness is hard. Living in a community is hard. Pick your heart. So I live in a tenement there are 8 flats. It's just like a classic Edinburgh tenement situation. There are 3 owner-occupiers and 5 flats that are rented. And it's really hard to maintain community. And it's a really proactive decision to say, every year when there's a turnover of students, we go knock on doors, we invite them to the WhatsApp group, we let them know what's going on, we let them know that, yes, the 3 flats that have permanent residents are here. They can reach out, they can use the garden, they can ask, for help. And it takes time and it takes effort. And every year there's a teething period because the students come and ring our bell drunk at 3 a.m, wake up the whole family, the kids can't get back to sleep, And it's almost like every year we have to teach them that is not how you live together with other people in one building.
Okay, thank you. I think that's interesting, but it's not a question, so I'm going to let Zoe go because we are nearing the end and see if it's a question.
It's kind of off the back of what you said as well, but also all the other things that I feel have been mentioned about creating community and the importance of it. I wrote down some things. It's when you're talking about changing views of people so that they learn how to live together and also what that could look like in the future if they've never come across it. Also with the retrofitting what we already have and the importance of that. I've lived in multiple different environments now that I'm thinking about it. I lived opposite a housing estate in Speak in Liverpool, which is a really rundown area that had a lack of community. They didn't have there wasn't a village hall, for example. There wasn't a community space for people to be in. There also was a bit of a loss of faith, which I think is also a societal thing. Not that I'm religious, I'm just aware we're in a church and I'm feeling it. But this societal lack of togetherness within a community, you lose that, and that goes to that we have so many church halls that aren't being utilised anymore. We have so many village halls that aren't being utilised. Because of the lack of community within this housing estate, there was rife societal issues that you get usually on the edge of a large city, which is always a problem. And then those council estates get labelled as a certain thing, and it's just a system that doesn't work. You get a bunch of people that are really struggling, you put them in one space and don't give them any support at all. So I'm getting to my question, I'll get there. But it's also, I think, creating a community, having those rural connections, having the green spaces. I think what my thing is that we were talking about, I guess my question is more about how much can we look at what we already have to utilise that. How much is it, we already have spaces that aren't being used and could be reused. I think my question is more in that I know we talk about a lot of new.
Okay, so have any of the panel got specific thoughts about how we can encourage the existing building fabric, be it church hall or whatever it is, to be? I mean, we know the benefits, so I don't want to hear that. It's like, how do we get those embedded as a community use group, or taken over and converted if it's big enough, like a big house that the National Trust, Historic Environment Scotland, could they be converting their houses into co-housing?
Financial incentives based on social value.
Thank you. Nice and concise. I like that. That's what we need at the end. Robin, see if you can match that in fewer words.
VAT.
Yes. Thank you. Only 3 letters. Brilliant. You definitely get the prize for that. Julia, did you want to come in there?
Not in such a short voice, no. I think obviously it's a lovely idea to be able to use communal spaces such as churches. I think expenses of running these places and running them economically is the big challenge. Retrofitting them, it's difficult enough retrofitting a house, never mind retrofitting a church. That's definitely very ambitious, but it would be lovely if those places were better used than stand.
Yeah, I agree completely. And Zoe, sorry, as a non-architect, you might not know there's VAT on converting existing. Did you know? Sorry. No. Well, sorry, this is shorthand for architects. That is that at the moment there's a really big issue. New build does not get charged VAT, refurbishment and conversions, etc. does. But it's not devolved. It's a Westminster thing. We have no power over it, and it's probably the one single thing that architects are pulling their hair out about. So on that lovely note, I think we will end it here. I'm going to say a few thanks, and then I'm going to ask Craig if you want to do any sort of wrapping up, but there's no need to. But I would like to say thank you all for coming. It's been a fantastic event. Thank you very much, Sehrish, Savannah, Robin, and Julia. Great mix of perspectives. I've really enjoyed that. Thank you, well, Craig, for working with me on this and sponsoring it. Sophie and Zoe, to the artists, thank you very much. And to Glow and Jen, the back of house team over there, and to the Augustine United Church, and to Architecture Fringe for letting us host something like this. And I'm just going to, if you'd like to, Craig, you normally like taking the floor, so I'm sure you will.
I've talked enough, so all I'd like to do is thank you, Gail, because without this, we wouldn't have done 1, 2, let alone 3. So it's been amazing, so thank you very much, Gail.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Can I add one?
Oh, he was on my list. And no, he somehow came off it. Sorry, David.
Thank you, David.
But absolutely, thank you, David. Yes. The recording will be on our website. I'm not sure if we'll do, and slides we'll have on the website. I don't think I'm going to do a report on this one. It's too complicated. I don't know. If anyone would like to volunteer to write a report on this, it was meant to be more of just a airing of thoughts. It was never really meant to be something with an objective, but if anyone fancied doing a blog or a report or a poem, then please send it in. Okay,
big
enjoy the rest of Architecture Fringe. Bye-bye.
Big thank you to Gail, and please do join SEDA Land and SEDA.
Oh, sorry.
We're having a conference 3rd to 5th of October, save the date, and looking at sufficiency. So we'll have singers as well as poets and people around, as well as lots of really, really good speakers. Lloyd Alter being one of them. You might have heard of him, I don't know. So watch this space, and thank you so much, Gail. She brings SEDA Land to life, as it were, literally. Without Gail, there'll be no SEDA Land. So thank you so much.
Okay. Oh, there's David. We did just give you a vote of thanks, so.